version of what we refer to as the Beatitudes, but it's a similar sermon that Jesus gave. It's not exact. There's lots of differences. You'll notice that in Matthew 5, 6, 7 covers the Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew, and it has a orientation to it of addressing the Jews, particularly the elitists, the teachers, rabbis, and all that, because Jesus deals a lot with, you've heard that it was said, but I say unto you. And so he's correcting a lot of understanding theology concerning the religious leaders. So that appears why it's different in Matthew, but yet there's themes that are common to both of these accounts. And so as we said, Jesus is probably, he has a sermon that he's preaching in different places as he's going into synagogues and he's meeting with crowds and other people are following him. So it's not surprising that we would see similar things. Just like anytime we talk about the gospel, it's similar stuff. So it's not an unfaithful account. It's not a contradiction. But critics of the Bible will use all kinds of things like this to indicate, some kind of discrepancies, problems with the text because they're not identical, or Jesus leaves out something here. So that's, to me, that's not even rational. It's not even a good criticism. But Luke, he's emphasizing a totally different audience, it appears, than Matthew is. Luke is addressing those that would be opposite of the Pharisees. In fact, the Pharisees had a derogatory term that they used concerning basically, the people of the land. It was, in Hebrew, it's Am Haaretz, which means people of the land, and it refers to those who aren't committed to, God's way as the Pharisees would see it. They don't keep the traditions. They are not faithful as the Pharisees think that they ought to be faithful. So that's why they're called sinners, people of the land. And it's kind of sad that the religious leaders have such an arrogant and judgmental attitude. I don't know why that happens, except sin gets in the life of those who are leaders as well, and they can be misguided by power and having more knowledge, they believe, than others. So there's all kinds of ways in which sin can work in the lives of people who are even, we would expect better things from the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes. But they're the worst, and yet they condemn the others, as being terrible before God. So Jesus is always turning it upside down when he addresses them and talks with them. In Luke, we've looked at the beginning of his sermon when he talks about the blessings. He says, blessed, and then he has a series of woes, and which is a little bit different. And they're contrasting each other because he's bringing in or affirming people who are poor, people who are at a disadvantage, people who don't have the opportunities as others do. And then he turns it to the rich, who are rich now, and gives them woes. If your attitude in your life is wrapped up in your riches, you have your reward now, okay? That's always been an interesting kind of statement. You have your reward. But the problem is that that's the extent of it. You don't have the real reward. Enjoy yourself now because that's all you have, and you'll go into eternal damnation. Is sort of what Jesus is illustrating. But you have the woes against the rich, and he says, woe to you who are full now, and woe to you when people speak well of you now. So you always have to understand a lot of times figures are being used, figures of speech, in order to convey a lesson or an impression upon people. And what the blessings and the cursings have to do in the Beatitudes here, it's getting people to think, about their status before God. So if one is tied or a little bit too aligned with materialism, it needs to be corrected. And so you see these kinds of statements in Jesus in Mark that emphasize the poor and the rich. He's fond of using, and this is the nature of what we would call, refer to as wisdom literature in the Bible. James is like this. Jesus speaks like this. That often, in order to make an impact, opposites are used, to teach. And it's memorable because we remember the rich and the poor. We remember, when things are used in a rhetorical way. It's just a manner of teaching, and Jesus is fond of doing that. Now, I want to leave from there, and it goes to something that we're familiar with from Matthew, in verse 27 of chapter 6. He says, But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. Now, those are strong terms, aren't they? Someone says, well, what does the Greek say? The same thing as the English. They're strong terms. Hate and abuse and all of those things. And what's the purpose? What is Jesus saying? What is the underlying reason for him saying these things? I mean, it's, huh? Okay. So it's the power of God being illustrated. The power of God in what way? When we're told to, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you and harm you and abuse you. Yeah. Right. So it's a call to trust in the power of God, in God, not to retaliate, which is what human beings usually do. You have the, probably not. Not most people probably. It's even hard being God's people to choose by faith not to retaliate or not to have a passive aggression action against the one who has harmed you in some way. It's just a way. I think the reason it seems so odd and so against everything that we would feel is notice how sin has led us so far away from God. It's unnatural. Ever since the beginning and kicked out of the garden and humankind, going forth, God has intervened. He's provided laws, but we're dealing with sinful human beings. And so the call to be holy is, it shouldn't be unnatural or extreme. It should be the natural thing of God's creation to choose holiness, right? But it's so foreign to people because of sin. It makes the distance very wide. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the way human beings would rationalize, So Jesus is calling us to a different attitude. Now, he's not saying that it doesn't hurt. The New Testament even doesn't say it's not that we're warned not to become angry, but it's how we what? Act. It's what we do with it that becomes the problem. So, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Paul would say in the book of Ephesians, and a relationship of marriage and, our interaction with people. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And to be sure, yeah. I mean, some people may exploit that, right? I mean, yeah. But to be one that acts as a person of faith and chooses to, be the person that's guided by the will of God, there is a risk to it. There's never the promise that the one to whom we show kindness to that's hurt us in some way will, repent or regret or anything like that. That's the nature of the religion of Christ. It's based upon our rootedness and our trust in God, our faith. That's what guides us, not external things, circumstantial things. That's not the driver of our morality or our behavior. It's the internal faith we have and trust in God.
Speaking from personal experience, anger is something that you can easily get into. And if you do and you keep on getting into it, it can turn into rage.
Mm-hmm.
I've said this often early in my life. I knew that if I gave in my anger, where it would go.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've worked. I mean, it hasn't been a problem since I've been an adult. But I mean, I knew where I could go with it, and I didn't like it. The thing is, Jesus is talking about primal emotions
Mm-hmm.
right here. If you give in to your most base primal emotion, that can easily overwhelm you. And so what he's talking about is something that within each one of us, there is that potential for
Yeah.
rage and for really a lot of destruction.
And I'm convinced that these kinds of things are growing opportunities. I don't know of any other way to develop a virtue except to employ it when it's called for. Like if you're angry and you're about to lose it, but you step back and you don't, that's employing the virtue. And I don't think that just saying I'd like to be more patient is going to make a person more patient. What's going to make a person more patient is when it's employed when you're feeling impatient, to choose not to go in that direction. Yes? Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that's what Christianity is. It's not we're not just in a fun loving group. Like any other club. We're a community of faith, and if we don't believe it or embrace it, we're not going to be the same people we supposedly are when we're with each other when we're out there. It's not going to be the same. Somebody had their hand up. Was it you, Stan? Okay, go ahead.
Romans 12, verse 19 through 21 gives us some alternate action.
Mm-hmm.
Never take your own revenge. Leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. If your enemy hungers, feed him. If his
Yeah, it's true. So, but I say unto you, love your enemies. Do good to them. In other words, we are not of the people who retaliate. You know, nor do we react in kind. It's a different worldview that we possess than what others do in the world. He says, to one who strikes you on the cheek, these are illustrations of the very thing that he's talked about. If one strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from the one who takes away your goods, and do not demand them back. As you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. Now, Jesus is not original with this particular statement. We find similar statements in other places. We also find the principle being illustrated in some of the laws of ancient, civilizations, and the idea of don't murder, don't commit adultery. Practically every civilization has those two at least. But Jesus is the one that amplifies it, puts it in the forefront, and he puts it in a positive way. In other words, how you want to be treated should guide us in how we treat others. Now, as far as I know, I don't want to be disrespected, and I don't want to be cursed at, and I don't want to be exploited. You can just carry that. We don't want those actions taken against us. Then don't take those actions against others. If we would like people to be understanding, to listen to what we have to say. You can do it on a basic level to a very deep level. And so it's somewhat like looking in a mirror, I think, of how you want to be treated, seeing the reflection, and be that person. That's the brilliance in what Jesus is emphasizing in the positive. In other words, he's emphasizing the action of the one in guiding their behavior and choosing what they're doing based upon this principle. Matthew, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Yes. But it's not simply an example. It is a representation of God. If we are believers in Him and God's people, Yeah. But you're right. Yeah. People, there's always eyes on our behavior. Yeah. So we don't retaliate, and we give. That's another principle, right? and we trust. Those are key ideas that he's illustrating in this particular statement that he's making. So that's the guiding principle, and it's not called upon when it's convenient or when I'm in a good mood or whatever. It is the life principle. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But is it? I mean, um, I'm thinking when he says if somebody takes your cloak, give him your what? What's the tunic? You know, it's the yeah. It's I mean, that's what the poor would have. I mean, if I mean, that's apparel that's essential. And so, it's kind of like the understanding that you're saying that it all belongs to God. You've got to trust God. Well, see, if I'm always with the attitude of protecting and, getting and, like you said, trying to get even or upset, we don't know how God will bless us when we trust him. So we either believe God is still working in our world or he's not, right? And I think even though it's been so long since Jesus said these words, as far as I know, God's not absent at all. Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yes. With. Mhm. 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 Yeah. Right. Yeah, I think there's I think it's a different situation. Jesus is talking about in our personal relationships. I do know Paul teaches that the government carries the sword, so there's a right of that. Well, yeah, I think if you're a part of the military, then yeah, I mean you have the divine right for governments to protect themselves.
Cornelius
And
obeyed the gospel and was not told by Paul or by Peter to give up.
yeah, 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 it is. I mean, yeah, yeah. Well, I don't. Yeah, like you said, what were you gonna say? Right. It's relation. Yeah. Hmm. That's different. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think. Yeah. Right. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Paul said if a man does not provide for his own, especially his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than infidel. I believe that providing involves providing
Yeah,
self-defense
I,
for
I
yourself.
don't think this is saying let someone come into your home and shoot up your family and take your kids and rape your wife. That's a whole different situation. What we see here is in our everyday dealings of life. Um, watch your attitude. Someone's causing, Christians were intimidated a lot in culture, um, sneered at, made fun of, the brunt of jokes. And, there's probably many occasions when there was some harm that was done to them as a result of who they were and who they followed. And it's our reaction to that in our relationships with individuals and people. I don't think the war thing's the same thing, and I don't put the violence he's of that may incur or come to a family as if we were just laid down. Paul, um, you remember when he was in jail, he appealed to Caesar and he used his citizenship and fought against things that were not right. So anyway, I know that's we're going to dematerialize into all kinds of rabbit holes. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. But I think Jesus here is talking specifically about our relationships with others on a personal level. Um, yeah. Mhm. Yeah. let's get back to our study here. I know, but I only got like 5 minutes left. No, go ahead.
Thing is, Brenda can tell you about an experience that happened with her dad when he came home from World War II. He flew on a B-25, B-26 bomber in the South Pacific. And when the Sunday that he came back home from serving, after the war was over, the preacher at the congregation where they were attending got up in the pulpit and with a lot of the veterans that were there from the war said that you are all guilty of murder, that you were not justified in going over there, and just condemned them from the pulpit and caused a firestorm in the congregation. And he, the next Sunday, this preacher got up in the pulpit and apologized. And if I called the name of the preacher, some of you know who he is. He's passed away now. But her dad went up and said, listen, said, we went over there to fight for the freedom that you have to get from that pulpit to preach. And so, again, yeah, there's two ways to look at it. But when he got up there and said, you're all guilty of murder, that was completely a different way.
Yes.
I think we need to be careful because this needs to be understood in context.
Yes.
Exactly. Context is completely different than America today. And I don't know that we can stretch this into the discussion that we're talking about. I think this is talking about interpersonal relationships between believers and the world, and we can't go outside of that. And if you want to understand this scripture even more deeply, you need to study their culture and what's going on in that time. The Romans are coming through and pressing people.
Yeah.
A mile or two. This is the culture that they're living in. It's something completely different than the Bible says.
Yeah, you're right.
Historically speaking, Christians did not fight in that period of time against the government or anybody. We have a quote from I don't know, some Roman or historian about how he said, "Don't you have ropes at home that you can go and hang yourself?" I mean, they were lining up to be killed by the government because of their faith. They loved the Lord so much they didn't fear what the government could do to them. So I mean, there's this like we're talking about. I think it's real, and I appreciate
Yeah.
open discussion because we have got this teaching of love and let God take care of it, vengeance and loving your neighbor, and we see example after example of Christians dying for the Lord
Yeah.
and not picking up.
And I think that's still a different situation
It's the same situation.
because it is one who is put on a situation of denying the faith or whatever. They're becoming martyrs. I mean, that like Antipas in the book of Revelation 2, he's upheld as an example. Would we freely die for our faith? Yes. That should be the answer. And that's what happened. It doesn't mean they wouldn't be employed in Roman army or anything like that anyway. Yeah. But I think there's interpersonal, which is what Jesus is dealing with here, and how we interact with one another. Going, to war or whatever, I think we would have to pick up other things like Romans 13 and other places where governments are legitimized in carrying the sword. And then talk about the threat, be thou faithful unto death, in view of death. If the reason for the hostility, is my faith in Christ, and I'm called to either bow down to the image or, be burnt, then I'm going to be burned up. So to me, that's some different situations. So, yes.
Some of the Mosaic laws, things that they had in place at the time that had requirements. I mean, they had these, rules for everything.
Mm-hmm.
The tunics that they wore, and I think, because of the previous, part of this chapter, he's kind of, upsetting the legalism, but he's also coming down here and there's things that they have legalistically in the Mosaic law concerning that, and he's saying these are not right anymore. I'm telling you a better way to approach this rather than what.
Well, it's just like to the common person, what is your reaction to things out here? being wronged here, someone saying this, someone insulting you. I'm talking about in the common person. Not everybody is, dealing with some kind of violence. But generally speaking, for the common Christian, a common disciple of Jesus, how are we behaving out there? That's the point, in my understanding.
This uses vengeance.
Yes.
See, this is the idea of vengeance.
Mm-hmm.
There's a vast difference between vengeance, maybe trying to stop someone from
Right.
committing
Mm-hmm.
a crime against a woman or a child. We saw a child out there being molested in some way or killed. How would we react? Well, God wants us to love people. But I love that baby too.
Yeah, yeah. It's the word, well, maybe we should look at the word enemy too. That encompasses a lot. It can be a hostile enemy. It could be a person who is just not your friend, but kind of ugly to you. Someone who disrespects you in some way. He's using the word to illustrate that which is somehow against you in some way. Okay, it's a broad term. And he is encouraging us not to retaliate, act in kind, but to think about how I can leverage good to react to this individual. How can good be leveraged? How can this guiding principle? And it may change a lot of behavior of individuals who thought about that. So it's how we interact with people around us, and how do we act to situations that are very disturbing, like the Roman soldier coming and forcing us to walk another mile with him. We had to carry baggage for the soldier, and then the Christian, what does he do? Oh, let's keep going, man. I'm all right. It's a call to be unexpected, different, surprising to the other person as to how we respond. That's the message that Jesus is talking about. To me, he says, if you'll keep reading, he goes, and if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that for you? This is the way all societies were. Everybody, if I do something good to you, I have an expectation that you'll probably, return in kind. It's just that human expectation. That's the way things were. That was the social interactions of people. But he says, if we do based upon that principle, you're not any better than anybody else, because that's what they do. So, for sinners, do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? If sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount, what difference is it? In other words, it's getting us to think differently, to reorient our social interactions. Don't be like everybody else. Holding grudges, acting in kind, taking one another to court, like over the little things like David's talked about in 1 Corinthians. The behavior, that's what Christians were doing, and the letters being written to these churches. Why were they having so much trouble? Because they weren't following the lifestyle, the principles of Christianity.
I'm just laughing because I'm thinking of Matthew 25 and the sheep and the goats. He lays it out. These are the virtues of the sheep, and they're going to heaven. These are what the goats do, and they're going to hell.
Mm-hmm. The illustration is this, and I don't know if we really believe this. Which is more powerful, good or evil?
In our mind,
We know.
we take it internally.
Yeah. This is the challenge. What did the verse who referred to Romans 12, I think it was you? Overcome evil with what? That's another way of saying what Jesus says here. We continue. He says, but love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be what? Change your social interaction. Reframe how you behave. And what you're doing is you're building treasure in heaven, right? He says, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and to the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. You know, this tempers, even as a teacher at school, you know, we always, the faculty, it's always an issue, you know. We want to demand, you know, the standards be met, and then there's that thing of mercy and grace, you know, trying to figure out how. And so what's happening is we're thinking about the individual. What is it they need? Is it a strong hand they need now, or do they need someone to believe in them and for us to carry them along? We make those kinds of evaluations all the time concerning our students. Yes?
Brother James Cohen, about 20 years ago, preached a sermon, you cannot build your treasures up here, but you can send them to heaven.
Yeah.
A lot of these things.
Yeah, you can't build your
You cannot build your
treasures here,
send them ahead.
but you can send the treasures ahead. Yeah, I like that. Now, the next section is a continuation of illustrating the principle. Judge not, that you be not judged. And this is not judgment that we all do all the time. This is judgmentalism. This is arrogance on display. We are to judge righteous judgment. We are to evaluate. I mean, we have to. Everything we do is an evaluation of sorts. What is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is not, what's doctrinal, what's not doctrinal, what's heresy. You know, we're making judgment all the time. So not to judge in that situation, that's not what he's talking about. But there is this judgmentalism, particularly illustrated by the scribes and the Pharisees and the religious elitists. That is not called for. That's not loving others. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Notice that one of the theological messages is that how we interact with others is setting the stage for how God will deal with us. Think about that for a minute. I mean, that's pretty challenging. Would you want God to be harsher on you in judgment? Would you want God to be unforgiving? You know? So there's that caution there for us to emulate God. God's the one that we're following, and notice what he does. Yes?
This verse in particular is one I think it's important for us to understand all of this in context.
Yes.
Because if we miss the context of this, all of a sudden, the piano in somebody's church building
Oh, yeah.
can't say anything because we're judging.
Your judgment. Well, that's the argument that's used a lot by people when something is opposed. You're being judgmental. No, there's a difference in evaluating, you know, a belief or a doctrine and me being judgmental. Just because I oppose something doesn't mean I'm judgmental if it is what God opposes, you know. So, yeah, that's one of the things that is used a lot. All right. Good class. I do appreciate the comments.